with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so very, very happy that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcasts. And please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Spread the word to everybody you know and love. Before we invite our guests into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram and TikTok, and at Jedley Magic on Twitter. We would also love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. We have a fantastic online magazine. It is called Reading with Your Kids. You're going to find some fantastic writing in the magazine, great author profiles, cooking with your kids, recipes, STEM activities you can do with your kids, find out what games you can play with your kids. So much there on the Reading with Your Kids online magazine, and it is free, and it is available at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Pennsylvania. Our guest is here today to celebrate her debut middle grade novel. It's called The Do More Club. Please welcome to the show, Dana Kramaroff. Hey, Dana, how are you?
I'm good, Jed. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm delighted that you are here. I'm so excited for you to tell us all about the Do More Club. That's, I think, something I wanted my son to join when he was in middle school.
that would be great for all middle school kids to join the club. Absolutely. So, my book is written. It's a novel in verse, and it's written from the perspective of a boy named Josh, who is dealing with a very rough thing that happens in his community and on his middle school. His middle school is the recipient, I guess you would say, of an anti-Semitic attack of some graffiti of swastikas. He, up until this point, has kept his Jewish identity a secret, and being the only Jewish kid in the school, he really feels like he really doesn't want people to not only be talking about this thing that has happened to his school, but then to know as well that he is Jewish, because then it will just ultimately come back to him in some way that, this affects him. And that's hard for any middle grade kid to deal with. So, in the process of, the school and community healing, they bring in some facilitators from outside of the school to work with the kids to really try to break down barriers and have kids kind of just get to know each other better. And because, with breaking down barriers, we can, hopefully understand each other better. He ends up deciding that he wants to share that he's Jewish, and, different kids kind of come out of the woodwork and really take, this new knowledge and are quite cruel and continue to do acts of hate. What ends up happening is Josh decides, I just want to rid the world of all hate, and he forms the Do More Club in his school with the hope that, if he can, encourage other kids to, do acts of kindness, then maybe it'll make the world a better place. But there are a lot of obstacles, and there's a lot that he has to learn. And that's a little bit about the book.
Well, it's, isn't the universe kind of amazing? And it works in very strange ways. We are recording this the day after Hamas attacked Israel, and we're looking at hundreds of Israelis and now Americans who have been really just slaughtered. And so this idea of anti-Semitism is fresh in the air right now. It's something I don't get, and I don't think we appreciate. I think we're thankfully our society, the nation is becoming more aware of racism, and there's big campaigns to support Black people. There are big campaigns to support and stop Asian hate, but we hear about stopping anti-Semitism, but at the same time, I'll share this with you. The only community strike that I received for this podcast in the 6 years that we've been on air was in YouTube. And it was somebody made a complaint about a show that I did with Jonathan Rosen, which was called How Can We Use Children's Books to Fight Anti-Semitism? And how that earned a community strike. Thankfully, YouTube reviewed it and said, yeah, this probably isn't appropriate. It baffles me. The Jewish community is pretty small, in terms of world religions. I don't know the percentage, but it's the percentage of Jewish people in the world. We're talking 1, 2, maybe 3% of the total world's population, but they seem to have been the target of so much hate for so long.
It's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, because on one hand, growing up in an area where I was only one of a handful of Jewish kids, and then currently where I teach and where my own children go to school, I'm the only Jewish teacher in my building. My kids are mostly the only Jewish kid in their school building. And I know that no matter what a child is keeping secret, whether it's something that is not visible to the eye or it's something that is visible, that they don't have any choice about having it be known as part of their identity. And I really wanted kids to be able to see themselves, no matter what they might hide or want to hide. And I don't have an answer about, why anti-Semitism is so prevalent and, has become so much, in the public eye, particularly in the last 6 to 8 years. But what I do know is that the Jewish people, some of the most important tenets of Judaism are tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. Jewish people are constantly trying to put more good into the world. The idea of tzedakah, which is a Jewish word related to giving, and our kids, and as I was a child too, being raised in a Jewish home, were taught that you give to others, and that the highest form of tzedakah, the best giving you can give, is if you don't know who you're giving to, and the person who is receiving your gift, it doesn't know it's from you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really beautiful. These are some of the things that people don't know about Jewish people. And it's that ignorance of what people don't know that I think is what can cause so much hatred. And it's very sad.
Yeah.
And I hope that the Do More Club does bring into, the line of sight to kids and teachers alike that this happens, and this is something that we can't shy away from. And when jokes are made, we can't just stand by and not say anything.
You're right. You're right. It's it is any kind of hate is unfortunate, and we need to do all we can to teach our kids that they can make a better world, a world filled with love. One of the things that I've tried to, and I had a really neat experience one time. I was doing a public show, and it was in a community that was predominantly a Christian community, and we had 2 camps come separately to see my performance. One was a Jewish camp, a very not Orthodox, but traditional Jewish kids all wearing, the boys were all wearing yarmulkes and the girls with the long dresses. And then there was also a group of Muslim kids coming in, and the girls were wearing the hijabs. And the rabbi who came with the Jewish kids asked if I could teach the kids to do a magic trick after my show. And so I had this big group of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian kids, and I was able to do a trick that just reminded them all that they all believe in the same God, and they're all part of the same religious, they're all part of the same tree, the different branches of the same tree. And I think we forget that. And when you add them up, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Jews might have a very small population part of the world, but when you add all three of those branches up, that takes up that's a big family here in this world. And we should, if we start to remember that should be one way that we can stop hating each other.
That's right. I agree with you. And I think it's our children and, the listeners to your show and the parents of the children, they are the future. They're the ones that I believe are, making moves now to break down barriers, to, not accept the tenets or the ideals of their parents. And I hope that continues. We're seeing it all over the country with college students. They're I think finding their own voices, and I think that's really an amazing thing. And I really hope that these kids, they just come with like a great strong backbone that really just helps them to be the better than my generation and generations that came before me and you. That's all we can really ever hope for, right?
Yeah. Was there one incident that inspired you to write this story?
Yes, actually, there were quite a few incidents, to be honest. One in particular really stands out to me. I was an instructional coach. So I was a classroom teacher for many years, and then I was an instructional coach in my school district. And then I'm recently, in the last 4 years, have come back to the classroom. But I was working as a coach, working with teachers in elementary buildings. And I was working with a fourth grade teacher. And fourth graders are ages 9 and 10. And the teacher was reading a very traditionally read novel called Number of the Stars, which some of your listeners might know. And it's a very powerful book about the Holocaust. And about a week and a half into that unit that the teacher was doing, this student came up to her and said, "I'm sorry, I've sat here long enough. I cannot be part of this. This never happened. This is all a lie." And this 10-year-old was telling his fourth grade teacher that the Holocaust didn't happen. And this is what he was being taught. And this is a very extreme case of something that I've ever seen in any school that I've worked in, but it was so powerful to me. I was so blown away that a child that I was in this room working with for 2 or 3 weeks before this child said this to this teacher. And we were even working on that book, but I just remember being so blown away that I just could not fathom it. And I thought to myself, I need to include this in a book somehow. And there were other things that happened, as I was a child and even as an adult, where, I would just be put into these situations where someone would make a comment about my being Jewish, would, say something based on a stereotype. And really one of the most pivotal things that happened was during the pandemic. And this was just as I was like kind of in the midst of writing the book, the first drafts. My own synagogue was Zoom bombed. Some Nazis came in onto the Friday night services for my congregation, and they flashed swastikas and were screaming and yelling. And that's a scene that I pulled right from that real life event and put into the book. So yeah, there are a lot of truths in the story that come from my own experiences.
What a horrific and pointless exercise for people. on the one hand, there's a part of me that wants to make light of how sad these people are, that's what they do. They Zoom bomb. But on the other hand, it's like, no, this is a really incredibly hurtful thing. And how sad it is for that fourth grader. Obviously, it's hurtful for you and for other people to hear that this atrocity never happened. But how sad for that child to be. Obviously, this is something that he or she is hearing at home, and to be part of that, part of a family where, and I think the only motivation to believe that this never happened is hate. What else could possibly inspire you to say, no, I'm not going to believe my lying eyes. This didn't happen.
That's right. I mean, I have a child who's a fourth grader myself right now, and I'm just the idea that she would get an idea about a group of people, that would have to be taught from such a young age. And, it's terrifying. It really is. And the truth though is, I always come back to this, and I think it's a really important big message in the book, is that most people are good people. Mm-hmm. And the people who are the hateful people, we can't change them. We can only try to put some kindness into the world. And maybe not, we can't heal the whole world, but we can try to heal our own little corner of it. That's all we can do as human beings, right?
Right.
That's really what it comes down to, is who we are as human beings and how we are going to just make the world a better place.
Obviously, this would be a very powerful book for kids who are Jewish to read, kids who maybe like your kids, one of, maybe the only Jewish kid in a school. But I think, we've talked here on the podcast about how wonderful it is that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Obviously, there's a great benefit for a Jewish kid to think, oh, there's another kid like me, the only Jewish kid in the town, I don't want everybody to know. And for that kid to see themselves in the book. But I think it is so much just as important, if not more important, for the Christians, the Muslims, the kids with no religious tradition, to see how a kid who is Jewish might feel, and how important it is for us to stand up in solidarity to people when we see this kind of hatred go on.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because, I do want, any kid that this connects with to read it, of course, but I also want to see this in so many different kids' hands. And that's really the power. That's how we grow, and that's how we learn, because when we know better, we do better, right? So, I'm glad that you said that, because I wholeheartedly agree. As a teacher, I once had a fellow teacher come up to me and, thrust this book into my hands and say, Dina, I thought you might like this one for your classroom library. And I looked down, and it's a book called My Basmati Bat Mitzvah, about an Indian girl whose parents, one half of her parents, are Jewish, and she has a bat mitzvah. And I looked at the book, and I looked at this teacher, and I just graciously said thank you, but this teacher knew that I was Jewish, and they thought that I should have this book. And I thought to myself afterwards, what I should have said is, oh, I know all about being Jewish. How about if you keep it and you have your kids read it, and then they'll learn and grow, and, of course, your hindsight's always, better, right? But I just, in that moment, was really taken aback by that, because sometimes we do try to, teachers, and not to get too political, but, the majority of teachers in America are white women, and we have a really important job to share characters from all different backgrounds and all different experiences. And, that's, as I said, that's how we grow. That's how we become better people. And that's how we understand and let ignorance go by the wayside. So
Yeah. You know, I've talked on the podcast. Obviously, it wasn't until recently that, you know, being an old white guy, you know, growing up, most of the books were about white kids. And, you know, and unfortunately, too many of the books I read featured Dick and Jane, and I didn't care what color they were. They were just boring. But anyway, I was having a conversation with Naomi Schaefer, who is the boss clown of a group that I'm a part of, Clowns Without Borders. And we both talked about how these two different books that we read to our kids as when they were kids, and we're talking about clowns, how important it was. And I didn't realize until that conversation that, oh, my kids were seeing themselves in those pages of that book. I just thought it was me and it was just a coincidence. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's why representation is so important. And so I got it. But the whole time I've been doing the podcast, I know that it's the window part of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. That, I think, is what's so very, very important, because it gives us all a chance to look at people that we might think of as an other. And that's not helpful. It's not helpful to see people as others. It's great to see people as different, as sharing something that we don't have, that we can learn from. But it's most important for us to see each other as members of the same beautiful human family. And I think that that's something that the Do More Club can absolutely do for kids. And so I applaud you for writing this book. I'm curious, why did you choose to write in verse?
a lot of people ask me that. A couple different reasons. So I've always loved poetry, but one of the things I always tell kids, especially about novels and verse, is that you don't have to love or like poetry to love a novel in verse. I felt, and I've always felt, that poetry is a beautiful way to express deep emotion, because you were asked as the reader to slow down with every line break. And because of that, and because of the poignant moments that I knew I wanted to include in the book, I felt like writing it in verse was going to be a really powerful way for me to tell Josh's story. I also, as an educator, and I spent the last 3 years teaching fifth grade, and have worked having novels in verse be books that my students could choose from on a regular basis over the last few years. We know our kids, most kids, love graphic novels, and are quite frankly, are very threatened when they open a book that's written in prose. Our kids that are our struggling readers, when they see those, the books with, it's just all words going down the page from left to right, they feel overwhelmed. They're threatened by it. They struggle. And I want all my students to feel successful. And there's something about the amount of white space on the page in a novel in verse that is less intimidating for a lot of kids. And so I've always found that verse novels were such an amazing bridge between graphic novels and novels in prose for my students. And so that's another really exciting for me thing. I hope if my book's the first book that a child reads that's in verse, I'm really excited because I just feel like there's a whole new world of so many verse novels out there. And my website, which is DanaKramaroff.com, has a list of some of my favorites. So I thought I'd mention that.
Awesome. And am I right in thinking that unlike a book in prose, which typically takes the kid from point A to point B to point C and takes him all the way around on the journey, that a novel in verse, we're reading these little bits, and each kind of verse has its own beginning and end, and then we have to kind of piece those together. Does that require more? Not require is a bad thing. It sounds like it would require kids to do some more thinking as they're putting things together.
So it's still telling the story. There's a flow. But I just think because of the way that the scenes, I think that some verse novelists may write, it might seem as if you're jumping from one scene to the next. But I think that just like an author of a prose novel would have time pass by saying, a week later, I think authors that are writing in verse are doing that as well. So I don't know that it's a like piecemeal, but more just like each, I guess, separation of poems in the verse novel can kind of seem like it's telling its own beautiful story in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Yeah. Well, I'm real excited. Tell everybody again your website where they can go to find out more about the Do More Club and more about you.
Absolutely. So my website is DanaKramaroff.com, and you can find all sorts of stuff about, my writer's notebooks, what I include in them, things about my own childhood, things that I love, all sorts of good little goodies for kids and teachers and anyone who's interested in reading and writing. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm on social media. Please follow me there. On Instagram at Dana Kramaroff and on Twitter at Dana K. And I'm on TikTok as well. So if you want to see some of my funny videos, you could find me there.
Awesome. We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Do More Club, a great new novel in verse from our guest, Dana Kramaroff. Dana, thank you so much. This has been a really powerful and important conversation.
Thank you so much, Jed. Appreciate everything that you do to spread book joy and book love. And I'm so glad I got to get to know your audience a little bit.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcast. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading with Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.